I'm Sophie Harper, 32 years old, and I never thought I'd be standing on a Detroit sidewalk, tears burning my eyes after my own sister Brooke had security drag me out of her fancy car showroom like I was some nobody crashing her big night. It wasn't just the humiliation of being kicked out in front of all those rich people staring at me like I was trash. It was the way Brooke looked at me, that same smug smirk she's had since we were kids, like I'd never be good enough to stand in her spotlight. I came to her showroom opening to support her to maybe finally bridge the gap between us, but instead, she handed me a cleaning rag, laughed in my face, and told everyone I didn't belong. I was shaking when I called my husband Ethan, barely able to get the words out, and all I could think was how I should have known better than to expect anything different from her. This wasn't the first time Brooke made me feel small. Growing up in Detroit, it was always her show. When I was 12, I spent weeks planning my birthday, dreaming of a family dinner at this little Italian place I loved. I'd picked out my dress, even practiced how I'd blow out the candles. But that morning, Brooke came home with some stupid school award for math, and suddenly, my birthday wasn't mine anymore. My parents canceled the dinner, threw a party for her instead, and I sat there watching everyone toast to her future while I cut a cake that said, "Congratulations, Sullivan family." I went to bed that night pretending I was fine, but I cried into my pillow until I fell asleep. That was Brooke's thing, always stealing the light, always making sure I knew I was second best. By high school, I found something that was mine. I loved interior design, taking old furniture and turning it into something beautiful, creating spaces that felt like home. I'd spend hours sketching ideas, painting thrift store chairs, making my tiny bedroom look like it belonged in a magazine. Brooke thought it was a joke. She'd walk into my room, laugh at my projects, and say things like, "What's this, your little craft corner? Don't you ever get tired of playing with glue?" She was already working part-time at a car dealership, charming the customers, learning the business, and everyone said she was going places. I was proud of her, honestly, but it hurt when she acted like my dreams were some childish hobby I'd grow out of. When I told her I wanted to study design in college, she rolled her eyes and said I'd be broke forever, that I should learn something useful like her business degree. I applied for every scholarship I could find, worked 3 jobs to pay for my apartment, and got into the Detroit Institute of Design on a full ride. Brooke. She got a free ride from our parents, a fancy apartment near her business school, and a car to match. I'd come home for holidays exhausted from juggling work and classes, and find my old bedroom turned into her storage space because she needed somewhere to keep her extra clothes. I'd sit through family dinners listening to her talk about profit margins, while I tried to share news about my design projects, only for her to cut me off with a laugh and say, "Sophie, nobody cares about your fabric swatches." Those years were tough, but they made me who I am. I graduated, started my own small design business, and built a life I'm proud of. My clients love my work, turning their homes into spaces that tell their stories, using sustainable materials that don't break the bank. I'm not rich, but I'm happy. And then there's Ethan, my husband. We met at a design conference where he was just this guy in a plain suit taking notes during my talk about eco-friendly materials. He didn't flash his wealth, didn't act like the billionaire real estate developer he is. We talked for hours that night, and he listened, really listened when I told him about my work, my struggles, my dreams. When I mentioned how Brooke always put me down, he looked at me like I was crazy and said, "Your designs make people's lives better." How does she not see that Ethan's my rock, the one who reminds me I'm enough, even when Brooke tries to make me feel like I'm nothing? So when Brooke texted me about her big showroom opening, I thought maybe this was a chance to start over. She'd built this luxury car dealership from the ground up, selling Rolls-Royces and Bentleys to Detroit's elite, and I was genuinely proud of her. The invitation came on fancy cardstock gold letters spelling out Sullivan Luxury Motors grand opening, and I spent days picking out the perfect dress, something elegant but not flashy, a navy blue number that made me feel confident. Ethan was in Singapore for a business deal, some massive project worth $200 million, but he told me to go to give Brooke a chance. I wanted to believe she'd changed, that she'd see me as her equal, not the little sister she could push around. I drove to the showroom that night, my heart pounding with hope, telling myself this could be the moment we finally connected. I walked through the doors, and there she was, Brooke in a glittering dress that probably cost more than my car, surrounded by people in suits and diamonds, all laughing at her jokes. She saw me, gave me this fake smile, and said, "Oh, Sophie, you made it. You look nice." That pause, that little jab, it was like we were kids again. Before I could say anything, she handed me a microfiber cloth and told me to start wiping down the cars because some of the guests were leaving fingerprints. I stood there holding that rag, feeling every eye in the room on me, and I realized she didn't invite me to celebrate with her. She invited me to play the help, to make sure I knew my place. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself it was just Brooke being Brooke, but then she started talking to her guests loud enough for me to hear, saying things like, "My sister's into decorating, like rearranging furniture for fun." People chuckled, and I felt my face burn. I wanted to disappear, but I kept wiping those stupid cars, hoping if I stayed quiet, she'd let it go. Then she walked over, holding a glass of champagne, and accidentally spilled it all over my dress. She gasped, all dramatic, and said, "Oh no, Sophie, I'm so clumsy. You should clean that up before it stains your outfit." The way she said it, the way everyone looked at me, I knew it wasn't an accident. I ran to the bathroom, scrubbing at the stain with paper towels, trying not to cry, but the tears came anyway. When I came back, Brooke was by the main display, a Rolls-Royce gleaming behind her, telling everyone how she built this empire from nothing. I tried to join the group to act like I belonged, but she cut me off, saying, "Sophie, you're not staff, so stop hovering. You're embarrassing me." I couldn't believe it. I'd come to support her, and she was treating me like some stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I snapped, told her I wasn't her maid, that I deserved to be there as her sister. Her face went cold, and she said, "You don't belong here, Sophie. Look at you. No jewelry, that cheap dress. You're not part of this world." Before I could respond, she nodded to a security guard, this guy named Noah, and said, "Get her out. She's causing a scene." Noah looked like he didn't want to do it, but he walked over, muttering, "Ma'am, please come with me." I was too stunned to argue. The whole room went quiet, people staring as he led me to the door. Brooke called after me loud enough for everyone to hear, "Sorry, folks, just a family misunderstanding." I stumbled outside, my dress still wet from the champagne, my hands shaking so bad I could barely pull my phone out of my pocket. I called Ethan, sobbing, and told him they kicked me out, that my own sister had me thrown out like I was nothing. He was at the airport, just landed, and he said, "I'm coming, Sophie. Stay there. I love you." I sat on a bench outside, trying to breathe, feeling like the world had caved in, but knowing Ethan was on his way gave me something to hold on to. I was sitting on that bench outside Brooke's showroom, my dress still sticky from the champagne she'd dumped on me, my hands shaking as I waited for Ethan to show up, and all I could think was how I should have seen this coming, how that whole week before her big opening had me fooling myself into believing she'd changed. I'd spent days convincing myself that Brooke's invite to her fancy Sullivan Luxury Motors grand opening was a real olive branch, that maybe after all these years of her putting me down, she was finally ready to see me as her sister, not some loser she could laugh at. I was so wrong. Looking back, I can see every moment of that week screaming at me to stay home, but I was too stubborn, too hopeful, too desperate to believe we could be a family again. It started with that invitation. It showed up in my mailbox on a Tuesday, this thick card with gold letters spelling out Sullivan Luxury Motors, and I just stood there in my kitchen holding it, feeling my stomach twist. Brooke hadn't called me in months, hadn't even texted since Christmas, and now she wanted me at her big Detroit showroom opening, the one she'd been bragging about on social media for weeks. I called Ethan that night, reading him the invite over the phone, and he was quiet for a second before saying, "You should go, Sophie. It might be a chance to fix things." He was in Singapore closing some massive deal worth $200 million, but he still took the time to listen to me ramble about how maybe Brooke was reaching out, how maybe she was proud of me too. I wanted to believe it so bad. I spent hours that week picking out a dress, settling on this navy blue one that cost me $500 more than I'd ever spent on clothes, because I wanted to look like I belonged, like I wasn't the broke artist Brooke always made me out to be. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing my apartment, trying on the dress, checking my hair in the mirror, telling myself I could handle whatever Brooke threw at me. I'd built my own design business from nothing, turned houses into homes for clients who loved my work, and I had Ethan, the best husband I could ask for. I didn't need Brooke's approval, but I wanted it. I wanted her to look at me and see someone worth respecting, not the kid she used to laugh at for sketching furniture designs in her notebooks. I thought about all the times she'd made me feel small, like when I got into design school, and she told me I'd end up flipping burgers because nobody pays for pretty pictures. I worked 3 jobs to get through college, waitressing, stocking shelves, cleaning houses, while Brooke got her business degree handed to her on a silver platter. I'd call home hoping for a real conversation, and she'd just talk over me, bragging about her internships, her connections, her big plans to run a dealership someday. By the morning of the opening, I was a wreck. I got my hair done, spent an hour on my makeup, and drove to the showroom with my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I kept telling myself Brooke wouldn't be that bad, that she'd invited me for a reason, that maybe she'd see me walk in and realize I wasn't the failure she thought I was. I pulled into the parking lot, saw all these fancy cars lined up, people in suits and dresses worth thousands of dollars, and I felt so out of place, but I forced myself to get out of my car and walk inside. Brooke was right there at the entrance, looking like a movie star in this sparkly dress, shaking hands with some guy in a tuxedo. She saw me, and for a second I thought she'd smile, maybe hug me, but instead she gave me this look like I was a stray dog who'd wandered in. She walked over, all fake warmth, and said, "Sophie, you actually showed up. That dress is cute." It wasn't a compliment. It was a dig, and I felt my face get hot, but I just nodded and said, "Thanks for inviting me. This place looks amazing." I thought maybe we'd talk catch-up, but Brooke didn't even pretend to care. She handed me a microfiber cloth, told me to start wiping down the cars because some guests were leaving smudges, and walked away before I could say anything. I stood there holding that rag, feeling like I was 10 years old again, watching her steal my birthday party. People were looking at me, whispering, and I wanted to throw the cloth on the ground and leave, but I didn't. I started wiping the cars, telling myself it was no big deal, that I could handle it, that Brooke would come around. She didn't. She kept circling the room, laughing with her guests, and every few minutes she'd say something loud enough for me to hear, like my sister's here somewhere, probably rearranging the napkins or whatever she does for fun. Everyone would laugh, and I'd keep my head down, pretending I didn't hear, but it was like she was carving pieces out of me with every word. I tried to talk to some of the guests, thinking maybe I could fit in, maybe I could show Brooke I wasn't just her punching bag. I introduced myself to this woman, Grace, who seemed nice, told her I was an interior designer, and she started asking about my work. For a minute, I felt good, like I belonged. Then Brooke swooped in, cut me off, and said, "Oh, Sophie's just playing with curtains, nothing serious. Let me tell you about our new Rolls-Royce model." Grace smiled politely, turned away, and I was invisible again. I went back to wiping cars, my hands shaking, my throat tight, trying not to let anyone see how much it hurt. I kept thinking about Ethan, how he'd told me I was enough, how he'd be here if he wasn't halfway across the world. I wanted to call him to tell him I'd made a mistake coming, but I didn't. I kept going, hoping Brooke would stop, hoping she'd see me trying, but she was just getting started, and I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. I was still wiping down those cars in Brooke's showroom, my hands sore from gripping that stupid rag, trying to block out her voice, as she laughed with her fancy guests when she decided to take things to a whole new level and make sure I'd never forget my place. I'd been telling myself to keep it together, to just get through the night, that maybe if I stayed quiet and did what she asked, she'd ease up, but Brooke wasn't interested in letting me off easy. She was in her element, strutting around in that glittery dress, charming everyone with her big smile, and I was just the sister she could use to make herself look better. I kept my head down, focusing on the smudges, but I could feel her watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to twist the knife. I didn't see it coming, not really, even though I should have known she'd never let me walk out of there with any dignity. I was by this shiny Bentley rubbing out a fingerprint when Brooke came over with a glass of champagne in her hand, her heels clicking loud enough to make people turn. She stopped right next to me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, and said, "Sophie, you're doing such a great job playing maid. It really suits you." Her voice was loud, meant for the crowd, and I heard a few people chuckle. I froze, my face burning, but I didn't say anything, just kept wiping, hoping she'd move on. She didn't. She leaned in, pretending to inspect the car, and then her hand slipped, or so she said, and the whole glass of champagne splashed across my dress, soaking the navy fabric I'd spent $500 on. She gasped, all fake, and said, "Oh no, Sophie, I'm so sorry. What a mess. You should clean that up before it ruins your whatever that is." The room went quiet for a second. Then people started laughing, not loud, but enough to make my skin crawl. I stood there dripping, feeling every eye on me, and I knew it wasn't an accident. Brooke's smirk told me everything. I wanted to scream, to throw the rag in her face, but I just mumbled, "It's fine," and started for the bathroom, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold on to anything. I made it to the sink, grabbed paper towels, and started scrubbing at the stain, but it wasn't coming out, and the whole time I could hear Brooke's voice outside laughing, telling everyone my sister's always been so clumsy. I looked at myself in the mirror, my makeup smudged, my dress ruined, and I felt like I was nothing, like she'd stripped away every bit of confidence I'd walked in with. I thought about all the times she'd done this, like when I was 16, and she told her friends my design sketches were kindergarten doodles right in front of me, or when she'd take credit for my ideas at family dinners just to watch me shrink. I was done shrinking. I splashed water on my face, straightened my shoulders, and went back out there, telling myself I wasn't going to let her win this time. When I got back to the showroom, Brooke was by the main display, this Rolls-Royce that was the star of the night, talking to a group of guests like she owned the world. I walked over, trying to act normal, thinking maybe I could just stand there and be part of the moment. I even tried talking to this woman, Grace, who'd been nice earlier, saying something about how proud I was of Brooke's work. Brooke cut me off, her voice sharp, and said, "Sophie, nobody needs your commentary. Why don't you go check the napkins or something?" People snickered, and Grace looked away, embarrassed for me. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't back down. I said, "I'm not your staff, Brooke. I'm your sister, and I came here to support you." My voice was louder than I meant, and the room got quiet again, everyone watching, waiting for what she'd do next. Brooke's face changed, like I'd crossed a line she'd been daring me to cross. She stepped closer, her eyes cold, and said, "Support you. Look at you. Sophie, in that cheap dress, no jewelry, thinking you belong in a place like this. You're embarrassing me just standing here." Her words hit like a slap, and I could hear people whispering, their eyes darting between us. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell her I'd built my own business, that I didn't need her approval, but she didn't give me a chance. She turned to Noah, the security guard who'd been hovering nearby, and said, "Get her out of here. She's causing a scene and ruining my night." Noah looked at me, his face all apologetic, and said, "Ma'am, you need to come with me." I couldn't believe it. My own sister was having me thrown out like I was some drunk crashing her party. I tried to stay calm, to keep some shred of dignity, but my voice broke as I said, "Brooke, you invited me. I'm your family." She laughed right in my face and said, "Family? You're not part of this, Sophie. You never were. Go back to your little craft projects." The words cut deeper than anything else, deeper than the champagne, deeper than the laughs. Noah put a hand on my arm, gentle but firm, and started leading me toward the door. I could feel everyone staring, their whispers like needles in my skin, and I wanted to disappear, to be anywhere else. Brooke called after me loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Sorry, everyone, just a little misunderstanding. Let's get back to the real celebration." I stumbled as we reached the exit, my legs weak, and Noah muttered, "I'm sorry, ma'am, just doing my job." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I made it outside, the cool air hitting my wet dress, and I collapsed onto a bench, tears streaming down my face, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call Ethan, praying he'd get there soon, because I didn't know how much more I could take. I was sitting on that bench outside Brooke's showroom, my dress still damp from the champagne she'd dumped on me, my face a mess from crying when I heard this deep, smooth hum of an engine pulling up, and I looked up to see a black Rolls-Royce Phantom stopping right in front of me, and I knew Ethan was here to make things right. I'd been shaking, barely holding it together after Brooke had security throw me out, like I was nothing but that sound, that car, it was like a lifeline. I stood up, wiping my eyes, trying to pull myself together, and the driver's door opened, and there was Ethan stepping out in a suit that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe. His face calm, but his eyes locked on me, and in that moment I felt like I could breathe again. He didn't care about the crowd staring from inside, or the fact that I looked like a wreck. He walked straight to me, took my hands, and said, "Sophie, I'm here. Are you okay?" I couldn't talk. Just shook my head, tears starting again, and he pulled me into a hug, holding me tight, whispering, "I've got you now." I told him everything, my voice breaking as I said, Brooke had kicked me out, that she'd spilled her drink on me, called me cheap, told everyone I didn't belong. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm the way he always does when things get serious, and he said, "We're going back in there to get your purse, and then we're leaving together." I didn't want to go back inside, didn't want to face Brooke or those people who'd laughed at me. But Ethan looked at me, his eyes steady, and said, "You don't have to do this alone. I'm with you." I nodded, took a deep breath, and we started walking toward the entrance, his hand on my back, giving me strength I didn't know I had. I could feel people watching through the windows, their faces pressed close, and I knew Brooke was about to get a shock she didn't see coming. When we stepped into the showroom, the whole place went quiet, like someone hit pause on the party. Brooke was by that Rolls-Royce display laughing with some guy in a tuxedo, but she stopped mid-sentence when she saw us. Her eyes went wide, darting from me to Ethan, and I could tell she was trying to figure out who he was, why everyone was staring. Ethan didn't give her a chance to recover. He walked right up to her, calm as anything, and said, "I'm Ethan Caldwell, Sophie's husband. I believe you have her purse. We'd like it back." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, and I saw Brooke's face change, like she'd just realized she'd made a huge mistake. She tried to laugh it off, saying, "Oh, Ethan, what a surprise. Of course, just a little misunderstanding with Sophie." But her smile was shaky, and I could see sweat on her forehead, something I'd never seen before. Brooke snapped her fingers at Noah, the security guard, telling him to grab my purse from behind the counter, and I noticed he moved faster than he had when he was dragging me out. She kept talking, trying to smooth things over, saying, "Sophie's always been so sensitive, you know how sisters are." Ethan didn't let her off the hook. He said, "I don't think throwing a drink on your sister and having her escorted out is a misunderstanding. It's cruel." The room was dead silent now, everyone listening, and I saw Grace, that nice woman from earlier, nod like she agreed. Brooke's face went red and she stammered, "It wasn't like that. I was just trying to keep things professional." Ethan didn't argue, just held out his hand for my purse, and Noah handed it over, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. I checked my purse, made sure my keys and wallet were there, and Ethan turned to me saying, "You ready to go?" But before we left, I looked at Brooke standing there with her fake smile, and I couldn't stay quiet. I said, "I came here to support you, Brooke, because I thought we could be sisters again, but you made it clear you don't want that. I'm done trying." My voice was steady, louder than I expected, and I saw her flinch, like my words hit harder than she'd ever admit. People were whispering, some even looking at Brooke like they were seeing her for the first time, and I felt this weight lift off me, like I'd finally said what I'd been holding in for years. Brooke tried one last time to save face, stepping forward and saying, "Ethan, Sophie, Why don't you stay? We can talk this out. But Ethan shut her down, saying, We're done here, but I'll give you some advice. Sophie's worth more than this entire showroom, and you'd see that if you weren't so busy tearing her down. He didn't raise his voice, but it was like he'd dropped a bomb. Brooke's mouth opened, but nothing came out, and I could tell she was panicking, her perfect night falling apart. Ethan took my arm and we walked out, my head high, even with my stained dress, and I didn't look back. The driver opened the Rolls-Royce door and I slid inside, Ethan right beside me, and as we pulled away I felt safe, strong, like I'd taken something back that Brooke had stolen from me a long time ago. After we drove away from Brooke's showroom that night with Ethan holding my hand in that Rolls-Royce, I knew I wasn't done with her, not until I told her exactly how I felt, and made it clear I was done letting her walk all over me. I spent days replaying everything in my head, the way she'd dumped champagne on my dress, worth $500, laughed in my face, had security drag me out like I was trash, and I was angry, so angry. But I also knew I couldn't let that anger eat me alive. I had to face her one last time, not to fight or beg for her approval, but to say what I'd been holding in my whole life and walk away on my terms. Ethan told me I didn't owe her anything, that I could just cut her off and move on, but I needed this for me to close the door on all the years she'd made me feel like I was nothing. So I texted Brooke, asked her to meet me at this little cafe in Detroit, somewhere neutral where she couldn't hide behind her fancy guests or her showroom, and to my surprise, she agreed. I got there early, ordered a coffee, and sat at a corner table, my hands steady, but my heart racing as I waited for her to show up. When Brooke walked in, she looked different, less like the untouchable queen she'd been at the showroom, her makeup lighter, her dress just a plain sweater and jeans. But her face still had that guarded look, like she was ready for a fight. She sat down, didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, and I could tell she was waiting for me to apologize, or back down like I always had. I didn't. I looked her right in the eye and said, Brooke, you've spent our whole lives putting me down, making me feel like I'm less than you, and what you did at your showroom, throwing that drink on me, kicking me out, that was the last straw. My voice was calm, stronger than I felt, and I saw her shift in her seat, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. She tried to interrupt, saying, Sophie, you're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a stressful night, but I didn't let her talk her way out of it. I kept going, telling her how I'd come to support her, how I'd hoped we could be sisters, how her words and actions cut deeper than she'd ever know. I told her about all the times she'd stolen my moments, like when she turned my 12th birthday into her award party, or when she laughed at my design dreams and told me I'd never make it. I said, I've built a life. I'm proud of a business that makes people happy, a marriage with a man who sees me for who I am, and I don't need you to approve of me anymore, but I'm done letting you treat me like garbage. Brooke's face went pale, and for the first time I saw something like guilt in her eyes, but she didn't apologize, not really. She just said, I didn't mean to hurt you, Sophie, but you've always been so sensitive, and I was just trying to keep things perfect at the opening. I shook my head, told her, that's not an excuse. If you want me in your life, you have to respect me, and if you can't do that, I'm walking away for good. I stood up, my coffee untouched, and I felt this calm wash over me, like I'd finally let go of something heavy. Brooke didn't say anything, just sat there looking at her hands, and I walked out feeling lighter than I had in years. After that, I threw myself back into my design work, taking on new clients, creating spaces that felt like love and home, and every project reminded me I was enough. Ethan was there, every step cheering me on, telling me he was proud, and we started spending weekends at this lake house. We loved just talking and laughing, building a life that's mine, not defined by Brooke's shadow. Looking back, I realized Brooke's cruelty wasn't about me, it was about her need to feel bigger by making me small, and I can't fix that for her. I don't hate her, but I don't need her approval either, and that's freedom. I've learned family isn't just who you're born to, it's who lifts you up, who sees you. And I've got that with Ethan, with my friends, with my work. If you've ever had someone in your family make you feel like you're not enough, I want you to know you're not alone, and your worth isn't tied to their words. Share your story in the comments. Let me know how you've dealt with it. And if this story hit home for you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Keep standing in your truth because nobody gets to dim your light.